Hello everyone, this is your boy Feltouch here, and welcome back to another video of mine. Today I'm going to be reacting to Spencer FC's video. I don't usually do this sort of thing at all, but I feel like it's a good source of debate. I like having a little bit of an argument, a little bit of a debate, and I feel like this is perhaps one of the best arguments which you can have. So I'm going to be discussing the England 2060 Euros provisional squad. There is currently 26 players in that, which will be decreased to 23 players, and I'll be breaking down that squad and believing whether those players will be good enough, and also reacting to some of Spencer's assertions as to whether some certain players have been omitted, should deserve to be in there, for example, and other things such as that. So first of all, I believe I should probably break down who would be my ideal England team. So it depends if we're going to go for a 4-3-3 or a 4-3-1-2. Those are the two sort of formations which Roy has used so far in qualification and also in the more recent friendly matches. So in goal, I believe you go for Joe Hart, right back Nathaniel Klein, the centre halves would be Cahill and Smalling, left back would probably be Danny Rose. He's probably been England's best left back this season, probably the best left back in the Premier League as well. The midfield three, it depends if you're going to go for the 4-3-3. So say we're going to go for the 4-3-3 formation, I'd probably pick Dyer, Wayne Rooney in midfield, and also Dele Alli probably. Those are probably the best midfield three. I don't believe that Wayne Rooney deserves to be starting up front, but I feel like in the more recent games of Manchester United, he's given the license to ping balls. He also drops a little bit defensively. He's very, very passionate. I feel like he needs that sort of player on the pitch, especially after seeing Leicester this season and seeing how well the passion of the players and also commitment and teamwork has also led them to win the title this season. I feel like Wayne Rooney would certainly be a more impact for the England team if he is playing in a slightly deeper position. Then if you're going to go for the 4-3-3, you'll probably go for a left winger, a toss-up between Lallana and Sterling. Those two have probably been not the best of seasons, but they're both very decent players given their day. And up top, I'd probably go for Harry Kane as a lone striker, and out wide, I'd probably go for Vardy on that right-hand side. It's a toss-up in that certain positions. There is a lot of debate as to whether you're going to go in that sort of direction. If you're going to go for the 4-3-1-2, I'd probably pick the same midfield three, and then perhaps drop in maybe a Milner or a Henderson, and maybe move Wayne Rooney further forward so he's just behind the two strikers of Vardy and also Kane. Now I'm going to be breaking down Spencer's arguments and seeing whether those, I believe, are actually any decent assertions, and he certainly makes good arguments as to whether Antonio, Noble, perhaps Aaron Cresswell, Defoe, and maybe even a couple of players deserve to be included in Roy Hodgson's England squad. So his first argument is that Jack Wilshere shouldn't necessarily be included in the England squad because he hasn't played, and I totally agree with that, he hasn't necessarily played. But on his day, as he argues, Jack Wilshere can be definitely one of England's best midfielders, and I certainly agree with that assertion. But then he goes on and says that Jack Wilshere does stupid things off the pitch. He's been caught swearing, smoking and things like that. At the end of the day, we're England. We used to have bloody Paul Gascoigne knocking about in our England team, one of England's greatest ever players. That lad used to smoke like a chimney. I'm surprised he wasn't injecting himself with heroin while he was up front playing against Scotland in the 96 Euros. It genuinely wouldn't surprise me. And then, of course, next to him, we've had many legends in this England squad in the past who've just had not necessarily the best of examples off the field. Wayne Rooney, of course, is a granny shagger, but he's England's captain. I don't necessarily feel that if you are sort of doing bad behaviour off the pitch, it doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't be included in the England squad. And Spencer, as a West Ham fan, has made several arguments suggesting that players such as Mikel Antonio, Mark Noble deserve to be in this current England squad. And I feel like I can agree that those two players have certainly been good. They've had a great season for West Ham. It's probably been West Ham's best season in, it seems like, thousands of years. It's certainly been one of their best seasons in a very, very long time. And I feel that those two players have been very, very decent. He backs up with certain assertions from different stats websites. He uses Squawker and WhoScored.com. I think they do provide some decent analysis, but stats don't necessarily mean that a player is the greatest player on the pitch. For example, Leicester City this season have had 46% of possession in most of their games and have walked the league by 10 points. Stats don't necessarily win you football matches. FC Midtjylland, over in the Danish Super League, they currently have this philosophy where they trust statistics. It's called the Moneyball sort of statistics. I can't believe that it's exactly the most successful of things. For example, they did a relatively decent job against Manchester United, but they're not exactly world beaters. They haven't exactly won the Champions League based on stats, and you can say yes, that's because their players aren't good enough, but the statistics for them would say, yes, we are perhaps good enough. Statistics don't necessarily provide the best assessment of players. For example, according to the Squawker assessment of alternative England squads based on match performances, you would also have to include a wide variety of players who certainly are not good enough for the England squad. For example, according to this, Carl Darlow would be in the England squad. In defence, you'd also have to include Steve Cook, Scott Dann, Charlie Daniels, and Adam Smith of Bournemouth. And also, of course, Scott Dann playing for Crystal Palace, who is just about scraped relegation this season, haven't exactly been the best of teams defensively. Then in midfield, you'd also have to include someone like Jack Cork, Mark Noble, Andrew Sermon, and those players wouldn't get a scratch in the England squad. Certainly, Andrew Sermon. And then up front, it would also include Jermaine Defoe, who has had a decent season, kept Sunderland up pretty much with his 15 goals contribution. Now, stats don't necessarily provide the best assessment of whether a player deserves to be in the England squad, for example. Certain players have played more minutes on the pitch, certain players have had worse players playing around them, for example. It doesn't necessarily mean that these players deserve to be on the pitch. I think another interesting assessment as to why West Ham have done so well this season isn't necessarily down to Mark Noble, Aaron Cresswell, and also Mikel Antonio. I think we can all agree that Dimitri Payet has been the standout player this season. And a Sky Sports article from very early on in January has shown that with West Ham playing with Payet, they score 2 goals per game, get 1.8 points per game, and also have a 53.8% win percentage with 47% possession. Without Payet playing, they have scored 0.9 goals per game, 1.4 points per game, and also have a 25% win percentage with 42.3% possession. So you can analyse many different stats in many different ways to prove your point and put it in your perspective as to whether you feel that those certain players deserve to be in the squad. Payet's influence this season perhaps is shown in a more recent game where he didn't play, of course, on Sunday against Stoke City, and West Ham lost by 2-1 away against Stoke, and Stoke have been pretty poor this season, especially in the last couple of weeks. I went to see them against Manchester City where they took a good tonking. I don't necessarily feel that Mark Noble and perhaps Antonio have been the greatest players. For example, if you take Payet out of the team, would West Ham necessarily be 7th in the league? That's the thing we also forget as well. West Ham haven't won the league. They've certainly had a great season, but they haven't won the league. For example, you could say that Mark Albrighton deserves to be in the England squad just because he's played in a team which is the top of the league this season. I don't necessarily feel that statistics are necessarily the best example of why a player should be in the England squad. Another further argument which Spencer seems to make is that players for England are not picked upon form. They're picked just because of their past reputation, perhaps for the England squad, or perhaps because they play for a bigger team. And I certainly believe that there is certainly a philosophy of choosing players which play for the more successful, the more renowned teams, for example. And I certainly agree that perhaps there is a little bit too much of that in English football. But those players have to get in those teams in the first place. They have to be good enough. For example, Fabian Delph last season, you could say he doesn't deserve to be in this current England squad. But last season, I think most people would agree that Fabian Delph was perhaps one of the better players in English football for his performances for Aston Villa last season. So it depends whether you decide to pick your current England squad based on form or their past history in the more recent seasons. I also feel like loyalty is a very, very important thing in football, and Roy Hodgson certainly has this philosophy of choosing players based on the players which he's worked with in the past, his loyalty, and I think that in a way is slightly admirable. I feel like players like Welbeck, who aren't necessarily that great for Arsenal, have been absolutely exceptional for England in the past, and if it wasn't for his injury, he would certainly be in this England squad, and I don't feel that certain other players like Rashford would necessarily be on the plane, or the bus, or on the train to France this summer. Think back to when you used to play for your school team. If you had a manager who would perhaps drop you once every other week because you didn't perhaps make a pass or certain things like that, you don't exactly warm to that manager. You don't play that well underneath him. I feel like loyalty is a very, very important thing in football. If you have a manager who trusts in your ability and is going to pick you week in, week out, not necessarily because you played poorly against Watford, but because you are a decent player overall, I feel like that sometimes deserves you to be in the England squad. I think having this team which were players which work together all the time instead of constantly chopping and changing players, it helps to build a better team overall, in my personal opinion. Now, if we were to pick players on form, Our past history hasn't necessarily shown that form is the best mediator of whether a player is a decent player and deserves to be in the England squad. For example, if you look at some of England's one-cap wonders, I can bring you many examples of players who haven't exactly been that decent when it comes to international level. There's a massive step up from playing for West Ham and then playing for England, and you could say, yes, these players haven't been given an opportunity, but if you look at players who have been given an opportunity, and they just haven't cut the mustard, there's so many players. You can look at Ryan Shawcross, Joey Barton, Seth Johnson, David Nugent, Michael Ricketts, Jay Bothroyd, and Anthony Gardner as perhaps the most prime examples of players who've made in one appearance and just haven't been good enough. Form necessarily isn't a predicate of whether a person should be deserving of playing in the England squad. And I think, yes, Mark Noble's had a brilliant season. In fact, he's had a good couple of seasons. But does that necessarily mean he's international quality? I do not think so. And if you look at the style of play of England, where would Mikel Antonio play? Would he play as a right winger? I don't think so. He's been a more defensive player. He sits a little bit further back. Yes, he's brilliant at running at players, but can you do that at international level, where a game where you need to have so much more possession, you can't play the same counter-attacking football as West Ham have certainly played this season? Football certainly changes between club level and international level, and I think style is an important factor. Jack Wilshere is certainly a better player for the England squad in the style of football we play. We play some decent possession football more recently, and we don't exactly look to be lumping the ball upfield. I don't think that Mark Noble is perhaps the best possession player. If you were to say, where would he currently fit in this England squad? He's the more defensive player. Is he going to be taking Eric Dyer's position? I don't think so. Will he take Drinkwater's position? I don't think so. I don't think either of those players would be dropped in favour of Mark Noble. What's the point in taking a player who's going to sit on the bench? And that's the exact reason why I don't think that Fabian Delph will be in there. What's the point in taking him? Where's he going to play? He's not going to play at all. We've got far too many midfielders, and Delph isn't going to be in that England squad as far as I'm concerned. And I'm saying that as a Manchester City fan. I think that another good point is saying that certain players haven't played that many games this season. I think that Spencer's alluded to this point several times in this video. And I don't necessarily think that if you don't play for your team at club level, it necessarily means you're a bad footballer. For example, if you look at City's squad, it's very, very difficult for Fabian Delph to break into that City squad, whereas he'd play for a hell of a lot of other teams if he was playing, for example, for Aston Villa. He'd smash 38 games a season. He'd smash 38 games a season for Bournemouth. He'd smash 38 games a season for someone like West Ham, probably. And in honesty, I don't think he's perhaps the City's greatest player, but he's a good footballer and he deserves to be playing Champions League football. For example, if you were to pick players if they weren't necessarily playing for their team, a good example would perhaps be Mario Götze, the man who scored the World Cup winning goal. This season he's made 21 appearances for Bayern Munich, playing 1,064 minutes, scoring 6 goals and 4 assists. Would he be in the Germany squad? I feel like he'd walk into it. I feel like you'd probably have to get Jurgen Low to give him a piggyback into the squad, but I'm sure he'll get into it. If Götze was English, would he be in the England squad? Hell yes. Hell yes, he'd be in the England squad. So I don't think necessarily the minutes played this season necessarily makes you a bad player, and it doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't be deserving of playing in that England squad. If you look in the past England squads, people who've been picked on form, they necessarily haven't done that well. I think back to the last England Euro squad, we picked Martin Kelly over someone like Micah Richards, who had the season of his life that year, and instead we picked Martin Kelly, who was absolutely shocking, and look at him now. I know I can't exactly say that Micah Richards has gone on to much better things, but I certainly believe that season Micah Richards was a far superior player. So you can't necessarily say that Roy Hodgson picks players based on their club they play for. I mean, at the time Martin Kelly was playing for Liverpool, he hasn't exactly gone on and done much better things since then. I don't think you would ever say that Martin Kelly deserves to be put in the England squad ever again. And on top of that, we also had players like Scott Parker playing for us, and he wasn't exactly that brilliant exactly in the Euros either. I think that England's style of play has changed since the last Euros, has changed since the last World Cup. We're certainly more of an attacking team, counter-attacking. We found our sort of style. And I think the Germany game has to expose that. I think the France game has shown that England are a very, very decent team now. We've got a lot of good players, got good young players who are coming through into the team. And Spencer makes the argument that Roy Hodgson's only job as England manager to look forward to bringing in that next level of player for the generation. And I don't believe that. I think that you look at the current England squad, there's players in there there who are certainly good enough to be playing in this current team now, not just necessarily for the future, but they're good enough now. But anyway, to summarise, I think that the current England squad is very, very decent. There is a lot of players in there who are genuine quality, and I think that England can do very decent in this next coming Euro competition, certainly given the group which we have. It's not the best of groups. I mean, you're looking at, you seeing Russia, and you think, oh, okay, they're a decent name on paper. They scrape through the qualifiers. You're looking at Wales. They haven't exactly had the best of results more recently, and it all depends on Gareth Bale. And you've also got Slovakia. Are they decent? We'll have to see. We'll have to see. It's a group which we should be winning, and it's a group which you should easily progress in. But England at tournament football are always interesting. Now, as to the current squad which we've always picked, which 3 players I believe will not be going? Well, he's pretty much said that Rashford's not going. I don't think that Fabian Delph will go, and I don't think that Townsend will go. And I think that Townsend has had a very, very decent season. He only played about half of it, if that. I mean, he's done very, very well in the games which he's played for Newcastle on the team, which is just absolutely shocking for him to do for him to score the amount of goals which he has, and for him to also create the amount of assists which he has. Shows how much of a genuinely decent player he is, and the games which he has played for England, he has always seemed to have excelled in. And I think that's the reason why, in my personal opinion, that Townsend certainly deserves to be in this England squad, but I do not feel like he's going to be going to the overall tournament. But there you go, that's my certain opinions. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed, and leave your thoughts of it down in the comment section down below. Do you think that some of the arguments I've made have just been absolute bollocks? Don't be afraid, let me know. Thank you very much for watching. I'll read about you.